Hey guys, it's Brock. Welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be about the hero's journey once again. The reason why I frequently talk about the hero's journey is just because it's so relevant in everyday life. It's a good way to connect the problems of the past to the problems of the present. It's a good way to connect religious stories, mythologies, fables to things like modern media, such as movies, video games, things like that. And it's a good way to kind of work out the world around us. So specifically, today I'm going to talk about the theme of exile to the hero's journey. I'm going to go down a list of modern media, such as Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Berserk, Star Wars, and I'm going to talk about how characters within each of those, movies or video games go through this hero's journey. So to begin, I'm actually going to just give a quick recap on what the hero's journey is, and then below I'll link the timestamps and you can go to each specific game or movie that I talk about. So just a recap of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is split up into three parts: the departure, the initiation, and the return. And each part is separated into kind of subsections. So for example, the departure is made up of a few things like call to adventure, supernatural aid, crossing the first threshold, and some other ones. The initiation is separated into the road of trials, atonement with the Father, the ultimate boon, and once again, some other ones. And finally, the return is separated into master of the two worlds, freedom to live, and rescue from without. So once again, I'm going to use these themes and connect them to the theme of the exile, or rather these parts of the hero's journey and connect them to the theme of the exile. So I'm going to be honest, I'm a fan of Lord of the Rings for sure. I'm just not very, knowledgeable about the extended lore, about a lot of the lore in general. So if I butch some of the names, I apologize. And if I get some of the lore a little wrong, I apologize. But so the person I want to talk about within Lord of the Rings who fits this exile theme perfectly, in my opinion, is Aragorn. So we're given the introduction to Aragorn. He's introduced as Strider. Now, Strider's a ranger, and we don't really know much about him other than that he clearly has skill in fighting. You kind of give the sense that he's an important person. And later you figure out that Strider is actually Aragorn, who is a descendant of Isildur. And Isildur, for people who maybe haven't watched Lord of the Rings, is the human that defeated Sauron at the battle. In the movies, he cuts off like the finger and takes the ring, the one ring. And it's at this time that Isildur has a chance to actually destroy the one ring, but instead is corrupted by it. So because of the actions of his ancestors, Aragorn decides to exile himself from being king, because by right of being an heir of Isildur, he is an heir of becoming the king of Gondor. He has that right, but instead he exiles himself. So the trials that he undergoes is basically what most of the movie is. The Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers. The events that happen within those two movies, and even in the books, are the road to trials. Those are the trials he faces. Those are the things that he undergoes. Those are the skills he learns. The rebirth occurs when he goes down the path of the deads and meets with the dead man of Dunharrow, who actually owed allegiance to the king of Gondor. Now, in the movies, I'm not sure about the books. I haven't read the books for a while, but in the movie, he's like, the dead men of Dunharrow are like, we only serve the king or whatever. And it's at this moment where he finally, accepts his role as a king. And it's at this moment that he's reborn, not as like Strider or a ranger, but as the king of Gondor, as the new king, King Aragorn. And the ultimate boon that he brings back is, he brings back the dead man of Dunharrow to help fight. And another part of the ultimate boon is he brings, years of prosperity and is a great king. So that's Lord of the Rings. Once again, I apologize if I kind of whiffed on that, but I think that Aragorn does follow the theme of exile pretty well, and I think it's a good representation of the hero's journey. So next we're going to talk about Game of Thrones, and more specifically Jon Snow's part in Game of Thrones as an exile, and how he follows the hero's journey almost down to the T. What's interesting about Jon Snow is he actually, at least within the HBO series, he actually kind of undergoes two hero's journey, one smaller one within a kind of bigger one. And that involves, his hero's journey within the White Walkers problem and the hero's journey within like the wildling problem. So obviously, because A Dream of Spring and Winds of Winter haven't been released yet, all of this information kind of is under the assumption that we're talking about the HBO series. For better or worse, we're talking about the HBO series. So anyways, Jon Snow is exiled to the Wall at the very beginning. It's not necessarily a forced exile or due to a failure, but nonetheless, he is exiled to the Wall. And this is analogous with the part of the hero's journey as crossing into the threshold into the unknown. That's part one. So when he's at the Wall, this is where he meets his mentor, once again, part of the hero's journey. He meets Mormont, who kind of takes him under his wing. He also meets the other Targaryen, who, also kind of brings him under his wing, kind of teaches him, certain things. So that's meeting the mentor. Then this is kind of where it splits into two separate hero's journey timelines, if you want to call it that. So the one is when he learns about the White Walker problem, which is kind of the overarching problem of the whole series, and the other one where he meets the wildling problem. So let's just talk about the wildling problem because it's a little bit smaller. But basically, he goes through the trials of, fighting the wildlings at first, and then finally he's kind of reborn, which is once again part of the hero's journey, when he kind of unites the wildlings. He takes on this new persona, of wildling and the Watch unifier. And that later comes into the overall hero's journey in regards to the White Walkers, because that acts as one of the ultimate boons. So talking about the hero's journey within the White Walkers, this is a little bit more clear because he hears about the White Walkers, which is like the call to the problem, like the establishment of the problem. And after his trials, which if you've seen the Game of Thrones, you know that throughout the first couple seasons, he's going through a shitload. So when he meets the Red Lady, Alessandra or whatever, this is analogous with the part of the hero's journey meeting the goddess. She kind of states that like, holy shit, this guy might be, the prince that was promised, or the Lightbringer, whichever theory you necessarily, subscribe to. He might be like the, in a sense, chosen one. So this is the meeting with the lady, or the goddess rather. So in the same breath, this is right after he was killed by his own people and had an actual physical rebirth, resurrection, which is a huge part of the hero's journey. That's when you kind of dish aside your old self and you're reborn into a new person. And this rebirth is like a physical, or this death and rebirth is a physical, representation of him dishing aside the old Jon Snow into the new Jon Snow that is going to be the King of the North, that is going to be the Lightbringer, or the Prince that was promised, that's going to destroy the White Walkers. Like, that's the physical marking point, which is, pretty obvious. Now, as King of the North, from his exile at the Wall, he's able to bring in the ultimate boon, part of the third return stage of the hero's journey. He's able to bring in his experiences. He's able to bring his alliances that he's made with, the North, with the wildlings. And that is the ultimate boon. He's able to reconcile with Daenerys and forge a, alliance, which eventually ends the threat of the White Walkers. So it's a pretty easy circle to understand, and it's one of the easier and more exciting ones, honestly, in my opinion. So that's Game of Thrones, and that's Jon Snow. Next, we'll move on to Star Wars Anakin's story. So Anakin's story is a little bit more abstract if we're looking at it through the lens of being an exile. But if we kind of just play with this idea that Anakin actually exiled himself from himself, then I think you'll start to make sense of what I'm trying to get at. So if that doesn't really make sense, just wait till the end and I'll try to explain it a little bit better, and hopefully by the end you'll get what I'm trying to say. So Anakin, from the lore, from, even we can take legends to account for some parts, but from, a young age of 9 to, I think he was 21 in the Clone Wars, maybe 23, somewhere around that age. He was a compassionate leader. He was a compassionate person. He cared for his mom. He cared for his friends. He cared for his apprentice. That was his fatal flaw, is he cared too much. He wasn't what a Jedi was supposed to be. He had these attachments. He had this love for Padme. He cared about his family, and he was too, I guess, in the Jedi's point of view, he was too emotional. And that was his downfall. So when Anakin starts to turn to the dark side, when he realizes, hey, I need a way to save Padme, so I'm going to try to capitalize on the dark side's power, and maybe that will help me save her. That's when Anakin slowly starts to exile himself from Anakin and become Vader. And then obviously when Anakin, I think the driving nail was when he killed the younglings, is when that's no longer Anakin. That's Vader right there. And I think it's at that moment, or whenever the official, Anakin to Vader transition happens, is that's when the exile begins. Anakin is exiled from himself. And it's during this time that he crosses over into the threshold, past the threshold into the unknown. And it's during, the 30 years or whatever, as Darth Vader, that Anakin is fighting in, the second phase of the hero's journey in the, road of trials. I think that during this time, he has a lot of struggle, he has a lot of, trial and tribulation. So that's what that is. And it's not until Luke comes that he's able to kind of, I wouldn't say atone with the father, but I guess in maybe some sense is he comes to the conclusion like, hey, Palpatine lied to me. Especially in the comics, you can see this, like, he doesn't understand, or he's out to, kind of get revenge against Palpatine in a sense. Like, he just lied to me about my family. Like, I have a son. I will make him mine. It's going to be mine. And this is when he starts to kind of transition a little bit. Like, it's still there. The seeds are planted. And it's when he sees Luke dying by the hands of the Emperor, in Return of the Jedi, by the hands of, Force lightning or whatever, that this, rebirth finally happens. He crosses from the unknown, from the, belly of the whale, from the phase 2 of the hero's journey into the rebirth of Anakin Skywalker. And it's through this rebirth that he's able to give the ultimate boon. And I guess like kind of the ultimate boon is this sacrifice to save, Luke. And I think in some way it's pretty accurate description of the hero's journey. He's exiled from himself. He goes through, 30 years of Darth Vader, and that's his road of trials. And then finally he's able, with the help of his son Luke, to be reborn into Anakin again. And while that doesn't necessarily excuse him from all the terrible things he's done, he has put a stop to the Emperor. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is the Manga Berserk. You guys might have actually seen the anime, maybe the 1997 anime, maybe the movies that were released, I don't know, maybe 2016 or something, I'm not completely sure, or even the newer anime, which if that's your only exposure to Berserk, please do yourself a favor and at least watch the 1997 anime. But if you really want to get into it, the manga is unbeaten. It's phenomenal. So anyways, Berserk is a little hard to kind of connect with the Exile a little bit, in the same sense that Star Wars and like Anakin's story was kind of more abstract application of the theme of being exiled. But I think that you can argue that after the eclipse, when Guts is branded as a sacrifice, and as when Skull Knight will brands him with the name, the struggler, that's Guts's, transition from the, that's his departure into the unnatural world. That's his first step into the hero's journey. He's crossing that first threshold. And it's through the next, 150, 200, 200 issues that he undergoes a road of trials. He first starts out as the Black Swordsman. You see in the Black Swordsman arc how rough and ragged and kind of cynical he is. Within the first issue, he tells that little girl to kill herself. He's in the Lost Child's arc. I think that's the arc name. He's ruthless. He's cold. He's almost not immature, but you can tell that the eclipse has had an effect on his ability to make connections and maintain connections. But, as time progresses, as he meets the new people within his, new clique, if you want to call it, he begins to reestablish these relationships. He's able to, undergo these trials successfully. And because Berserk hasn't ended, there hasn't necessarily been a completion of the hero's journey, but I'm just going to kind of argue that, he's reborn from the cold, jaded person that he used to be in the Black Swordsman arc to the most recent arc when, he's on the Fairy Island or whatever. And you can see the difference. He's more mature. He's willing to, let his friends help him. And that's a kind of rebirth from the person he was. So like I said, it hasn't ended yet. Hopefully it does soon. So I can't really go on a full hero's journey. But I think eventually when it does end, 50 years from now, that it's going to be a great example of the hero's journey. So next I'm going to start getting into video games. I'm going to start off the video game section with Sekiro. Sekiro is probably going to be a shorter section just because there's not a lot to talk about. But basically in Sekiro, you serve as a shinobi, which is basically a ninja, I guess. And you serve under Kuro, who's a divine heir. And he has, dragon blood in him. And he is one of the last, I think he is actually the last person with this quality. Now you are Okami, which means wolf in Japanese. That's your name. And the story starts with you defending and serving Kuro, but eventually a general, I think his name is Genichiro Ashina or something like that. He's a general within your ranks. He betrays you and you have to fight him, and you end up losing your arm, and that's when you're exiled from your role as shinobi who serves Kuro. You are beaten, you're exiled. However, you're saved by someone called the Sculptor, and it's through him that you start kind of rebuilding who you are to save the divine heir, to save Kuro. Now, through this whole game, you're going through fighting bosses, whatever, and that's your kind of your road to trials, like you would expect. Like the whole game is just you learning new skills, learning how to use your new tool arm, whatever. So that's the road to trials. Now, the atonement with the father is actually a pretty big piece in this, probably more so than anything I've spoken about before. But within the game, you fight the owl, who, I don't know if any of you have actually, for those who haven't played Sekiro, the owl is like a warrior who, I'm not sure if he's considered shinobi, but another warrior who at a young age actually taught you, and taught you the iron law, taught you how to be a ninja shinobi. But you think he's dead throughout the whole game, but then you finally figure out that, hey, the owl's alive. But you figure out that he's actually trying to kill or take the divine heir himself for his own power. So the atonement with the father is your battle with the owl, and eventually you killing the owl. That's the atonement. And I think that's the most obvious piece in this video that you'll see. So this is, at this point, he's finally reborn when he fights. When you beat the game, you once again fight the same general that you lost to before, whatever, Genichiro Ashina. You finally beat him. This is you being reborn as a new shinobi, as a new, as Sekiro, you're reborn. And the ultimate boons, depending on how you play the game, there's a couple of different endings, but the ultimate boons you gather from the trials are like the dragon tears, or if you help the divine child, these are your boons that you bring that, depending on what you do within the game, you're able to use to satisfy, the hero's journey. Finally, I'm going to talk about Knights of the Old Republic 2, which is probably my favorite game that I've ever played. Primarily because of the story and the type of lore that it introduces to Star Wars. I know it's not canon now, but honestly, it's the best piece of it's a little darker than normal, which is what I like it. It kind of gives the other side, the other view of the Force, and it's superb. So anyways, the main character in this game that you play as is literally called the Exile. You are known as the Exile. So it's an obvious reason why I picked this for this, video. But the Exile's real name is like Micha Surik, I think. I'll just refer to her as the Exile. But basically, in Knights of the Old Republic, it's a it's a sequel to the old Knights of the Republic 1, which is kind of Revan's journey after the Mandalorian Wars. Now, Knights of the Republic 2 is the same thing, but a little farther down. And it's also about the repercussions of the Mandalorian Wars and where that led to. But basically, the Exile was a Padawan during the Mandalorian Wars, where the Neo-Mandalorians kind of started invading the Outer Rims, and, the Republic was asking for help from the Jedi Council, but the Jedi Council was like, nah, we have to wait, we have to be patient, we have to bide our time. And a group of Jedi, Revan, Malak, the Exile, they were like, no, we have to help the Republic. We cannot let people die. We are going to basically disobey the High Jedi Council, and we're going to save these people. So she disobeyed the orders of the Jedi High Council and aided the Galactic Republic in its war against the invading Mandalorians. So during this conflict, during the wars, she actually was able to rise ranks to the Jedi Knight, and she served with Revan and Malak, and eventually she was commissioned as a general by the Galactic Republic. So in the final battle of the Mandalorian Wars, at Malachor 5, this is where kind of her exile begins. She gave the order to activate the mass shadow generator, which was, I guess, a device that unleashed a huge wave of gravity that just basically crushed everything in sight. So from her ship, she watched the generator kill Republic soldiers, Mandalorian soldiers, and it was this ensuing death and destruction that led her to feel such a wound in the Force that she actually cut herself off from the Force. And what I mean by this is she had just, ordered basically the death of her, fellow comrades that she'd, established a relationship, that she had memories with. So when she, ordered the mass shadow generator to be activated, and when she watched them die, the connection through the Force that she had with these people, it was so much to see them die that if she didn't sever her own connection to the Force, she would have died. So right here is where we see two instances of exile occur. So for one, she's exiled from the Jedi Council for her disobedience. The Jedi Council sees her when she comes back on her own accord, when she comes back and they question her, why did you disobey us? We said not to go fight in the Mandalorian Wars. That is not the Jedi way, whatever, yada, yada, yada. She's exiled from the Jedi Council, but she also exiles herself from the Force. And this is, I think that's a cooler portion of the, the exile in her story. So talking about her exile from the Jedi Council. So the only Jedi who served with Revan who was able to successfully turn away from the dark side after Malachor 5 was the Exile. And she was the only Jedi to actually go back on her own accord and try to defend herself for her actions and face trial within the Jedi Council. So Malak actually wanted Revan to actually kill the Exile because, once again, she was the only one who said, no to the dark side. Revan and Malak, sorry, I'm not doing that. But Revan was like, she's already dead. She's no longer a Jedi. Because remember, at this point, she had already cut herself off from the Force. And Revan kind of wanted to make a point. Wanted to show the council, like, the hypocrisy of their teachings. And wanted to show her show the council the result of their teachings. So it's also important to note that some of the reasoning behind the council was divided. Some of the more liberal council members, Zez-Kai-El, kind of felt like they were punishing the exile, not necessarily because of what she did, but because she was symbolic of the many Jedi that had fallen to the dark side over history. Like, she represented these Jedis. And this was a way for the council members to examine why and how so many Jedi had actually fallen to the dark side. Despite the council's teachings, like, hey, we're supposed to have this perfect code. Why are people still falling to the dark side? They used her, or especially the more liberal members of the council, try to use her as an opportunity to examine that. So throughout the game, you obviously go through your trials, you become more connected to the Force again. You learn from Kreia, who ends up being, a previous Sith. You start, that's your trial. Now, when you don't necessarily have a moment of rebirth. You don't necessarily have that distinct moment of, hey, I'm a new person. It's a transition. But when you bring the Jedi Council together again, they tell you specifically, the war had changed you. You were no longer a Jedi, but we could not tell you why. And if you had stayed, you would have changed us, and that we could not allow. So the reason why this specific sentence from the council is so important is because perhaps the exile shows the Jedi how it is to live without the Force. Something few Jedi have experienced, to experience life without that connection. And I think that's a huge, proponent of Kreia's philosophy, is especially when in that same sequence, she tells when she steps in and tells the Jedi Masters, like, let me show you who have forever seen the galaxy through the Force, see it through the eyes of the exile. Now, this is important because, up until this point, the exile had no connection to the Force. She was seeing the galaxy, as it was. She wasn't seeing it through the connection of the Force, and not many Jedi Masters or even Jedi or people could even say that they've had that experience. So when Kreia steps in and kind of drains their Force, instead of being able to let go of the Force as the exile did, their dependency on it actually caused them to die and not become one with the Force. They were just an empty husk. And it just goes to show that there is kind of a power and a benefit to being able to release yourself from the Force. And in a sense, it's almost an irony because the Jedi teach you to not have attachments, but their dogma itself is flawed because they're so attached to the Jedi, code. Now I'm going to go over some important quotes that I think kind of will solidify and really drive in this point. So these are all Kreia quotes, but she says, take the greatest Jedi Knight, strip away from the Force, and what remains? They rely on it, depend on it, more than they know. Watch as someone tries to hold a blaster, as they try to hold a lightsaber, and you will see nothing more than a woman or a man, a child. And this is obviously referring to the fact that without the Force, the Jedi are nothing. And I think Kreia really saw a problem with this because if you're relying so heavily on the Force, you're not seeing the whole picture. And this is further solidified when she says, when one relies on sight to perceive the world, it is like trying to stare at the galaxy through a crack in the door. Now, the context of this quote is a little bit different, but I still think it applies. When you try to perceive the world through one, way, you're only seeing through a crack in the door. And I think this is, kind of to digress a little bit, but I think this is why Kreia has such a problem with the Force in the first place. This is why at the end she says, it is said that the Force has a will. It has a destiny for us all. I wield it, but it uses us all, and that is abhorrent to me, because I hate the Force. I hate that it seems to have a will, that it would control us to achieve some measure of balance when countless lives are lost. But in you, the exile, I see the potential for the Force to die, to turn away from its will, and that is what pleases me. You are beautiful to me, exile, a dead spot in the Force, an emptiness in which its will might be denied. And there's some more quotes specifically about kind of the Jedi's just adherence to the Force and the Jedi code. For example, "Oh, not to love is no crime, or so the Jedi believe. It is their code that kills life, their adherence to the will of the Force." And this also connects to Jolee's, in the first Knights of the Republic, of Jolee's interpretation of the code, where he says, "The Jedi, with their damn sense of overcaution, would tell you that love is something to avoid. Thankfully, anyone who's even partially alive knows that's true. Love doesn't lead to the dark side. Passion can lead to rage and fear and can be controlled, but passion is not the same thing as love. Controlling your passions while being in love, that's what they should teach you to beware. But love itself will save you, not condemn you." So as we can see, Knights of the Old Republic 2 examines the other side of the Force and the other side of Star Wars. It dives deeper into the darker scenes of Star Wars. It doesn't show us what the mainstream Star Wars shows us. It shows us the darker side of the Jedi and, the flaws of the Jedi. And I think that's so interesting. And more specifically, like, this whole development of the Exile as a character is one of the best examples of an Exile character written in modern, media. So there you have it. Just a kind of quick look into the Exile theme and how that relates to the hero's journey. I hope this kind of opened you up to how, often the hero's journey is seen in modern media, not just myths like we've talked about in previous videos, but in contemporary modern media forms. So yeah, that about does it. I hope to see you guys for another video. Just make sure you subscribe and like. Thanks.